Avil Cistre was only 19 years old, but the airport already felt like his second home. While other people his age were still unsure about their future, Avil knew exactly where he belonged among machines, tools, and aircraft engines. He was the youngest aircraft mechanic at the regional airport, and many older workers doubted him at first. They thought he was too quiet, too young, too thin to carry responsibility. But Avil did not need loud words to prove himself. He listened every morning before sunrise. Avil arrived early. The airport at that hour felt peaceful, almost asleep. The runways stretched long and empty, and the cool air smelled of fuel and metal. Avil liked this time the most. Planes spoke more clearly when the world was quiet. He walked slowly along the tarmac, toolbox in hand, checking tires, bolts, panels, and fuel lines. But more than his eyes, he trusted his ears. He could hear when an engine was tired, when a valve hesitated, when something small was wrong but dangerous. That morning felt different. The sky was pale orange as Flight 217 was being prepared for takeoff. It was a medium-sized passenger plane, nothing unusual. Families waited inside, business travelers checked their phones, and the crew moved calmly. Everything looked normal, yet Avil felt a tightness in his chest. He stood near the edge of the runway as the plane was pushed into position. When the engine started, Avil tilted his head slightly, like a musician tuning an instrument. The sound reached his ears and his stomach dropped. The engines were running, but they were not alive. Avil frowned. The sound lacked depth. There was no strong vibration in the ground beneath his boots. It was like hearing a voice without breath behind it. That's not right. Avil whispered to himself. He checked his memory. He had inspected a similar engine only yesterday. He remembered how it should growl, how the air should tremble. This was weaker. Subtle, but wrong. Other mechanics stood nearby, chatting casually. No one else seemed worried. The control tower cleared the plane for taxiing. The plane began to move. Avil's heart started pounding. As the aircraft rolled forward, Avil focused harder. The engines increased slightly, but not enough. It was as if the plane was pretending to be ready. Avil took a step forward, then another. His hands clenched into fists. What are you missing? He thought desperately. Fuel? Pressure? A valve? He suddenly remembered a maintenance report from the night shift. A note about a fuel system adjustment. It had been signed off, approved, but what if something was missed? The plane turned and aligned itself with the runway. Avil's breathing became shallow. At 19 years old, Avil Cistre was not a pilot. He did not sit in the cockpit. He did not have a radio connected to the tower. His voice at that moment felt very small. The engines grew louder as the pilot prepared for takeoff, but to Avil, they still sounded wrong. Too smooth. Too empty. He looked at the length of the runway, then at the plane's speed. His mind calculated automatically. Distance, weight, power. A cold fear spread through him. If it lifts off like this, Avil thought, it won't climb. His mouth went dry. Around him, everything continued as usual. A service truck passed behind him. A bird flew overhead. The world did not know what Avil knew. The plane began to accelerate. Avil took a deep breath, fear mixing with responsibility. He realized something. In that moment, this was no longer about proving himself or being the youngest mechanic. This was about lives, and somewhere deep inside, Avil Cistre knew that before this day ended, the quiet mechanic on the ground would be forced to face the most important moment of his life. The moment the plane began its takeoff roll, Avil Cistre knew his fear was real. The aircraft moved faster now, wheels spinning hard against the runway. From a distance, it looked powerful, confident, exactly the way a plane should look during takeoff. But Avil's ears told a different story. The sound was flat, stretched thin, like a shout without strength behind it. Avil started walking, then running, parallel to the runway. His boots hit the ground hard as he kept his eyes locked on the plane. With every second, the aircraft gained speed, but not the kind that came from full engine thrust. It felt borrowed, temporary. Come on. Listen, Avil muttered, as if the plane could hear him. He waved his arms wildly toward the control tower, hoping someone would notice. The glass walls reflected the morning sun, hiding the people inside. Radios buzzed, procedures continued, and Avil felt invisible. The engines pushed again, louder this time. For a brief second, Avil's hope rose. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe it was just his nerves. Then he heard it. A slight unevenness. A delay between engine responses. Something was restricting the fuel flow. No power, Avil said out loud. His voice shook. This plane has no power. The aircraft raced down the runway. Avil's mind worked faster than his legs. He calculated the speed in his head, remembering charts he had studied late at night. The plane was approaching rotation speed, but only barely. The nose. Lifted. Gasps rose from the people watching behind the fences. Avil's heart slammed against his ribs. The plane's front wheels left the ground for a moment, hovering in a dangerous half-flight. It wasn't climbing. It was floating, struggling, balanced between air and gravity. Avil stopped running. This was the worst moment, worse than a crash. A plane that believes it can fly, but cannot. Inside the cockpit, the pilot pushed the throttle forward again. The engines responded, but weakly. Warning lights blinked like silent screams. The plane drifted upward by a few feet, then sank. Avil felt dizzy. He imagined the weight of the passengers, the fuel, the metal. He imagined the plane reaching the end of the runway with nowhere left to go. Abort, he whispered. Please abort. The wheels touched down again. Hard. Smoke burst from the tires as rubber screamed against asphalt. The aircraft swerved slightly as the pilot slammed the brakes. Sparks flew from beneath the wings, bright and terrifying. People shouted. Avil covered his mouth with his hands, afraid to breathe. The plane rushed forward, eating up the last meters of runway. Avil's legs felt weak. He was certain it wouldn't stop in time. Then finally it did. The aircraft shuddered, groaned, and came to a violent halt just before the runway ended. Dust and smoke hung in the air like a storm cloud. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then sirens began to wail. Fire crews rushed forward. The control tower erupted with movement. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, shocked but alive. Avil sank to his knees. His whole body trembled. Relief crashed over him so strongly that tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. He pressed his forehead to the ground, breathing in short, broken gasps. It was over. But inside his mind, the questions had already started. What exactly failed? Why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? What if the pilot had waited 1 second longer? Avil stood slowly, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. Around him, people were talking loudly now, pointing at the plane, replaying the moment with shaking hands and wide eyes. No one looked at Avil. And that was fine. He wasn't thinking about credit or blame. He was thinking about how close disaster had come and how fragile safety truly was. As Avil Cistre watched the damaged plane surrounded by flashing lights, he understood something clearly for the first time. Aviation was not forgiving. and from this day forward, he would never ignore the smallest warning again, because even the quietest sound could be the difference between flight and tragedy. The emergency lights washed the runway in red and blue as the plane sat motionless, smoke still curling from its tires. Avil Cistre stood at a distance, his arms wrapped tightly around himself. The cold he felt had nothing to do with the morning air. It came from the understanding of how close everyone had been to death. Fire crews surrounded the aircraft, spraying cooling foam around the wheels. Airport security pushed people back. Passengers remained seated inside, silent now, their earlier panic replaced by shock. Through the cockpit window, Avil could see the pilot sitting still, hands resting on the controls. Head slightly bowed, Avil recognized that posture. Was the look of someone replaying every second in their mind. Eh? Senior mechanic named Roland approached Avil. He had worked at the airport longer than Avil had been alive. His face was pale. You saw it too, didn't you? Roland asked quietly. Avil nodded. His throat felt tight. There was no power, he said. Not enough. The engines were breathing, but not eating. Roland exhaled slowly. That's exactly what the data is showing. Together, they walked toward the plane, now declared safe enough for inspection. Avil felt his legs grow heavy with every step. This was no longer theory. This was metal, fuel, and human error laid bare. Under the wing, Avil knelt beside the engine housing. He placed his hand gently against the casing. It was still warm. He closed his eyes and listened not with his ears, but with memory. Something didn't add up. The engines had responded, just not fully. That meant fuel was reaching them, but not freely. Avil stood and followed the fuel line with his eyes, tracing it toward the valve system. His mind returned to the maintenance report from the night shift. A fuel balance adjustment. Signed. Approved. May I check the valves? Avil asked. Roland hesitated, then nodded. Avil crouched again, using his flashlight to inspect the primary fuel control valve. At first glance, it looked normal. But Avil wasn't looking for normal. He was looking for almost. He touched the valve handle. It moved, just slightly. Avil's breath caught. This isn't fully open, he said. Roland leaned in closer. It should be locked. It isn't, Avil replied. It's sitting in between. The realization hit them both at the same time. The valve had been left partially closed enough to allow the engines to start, taxi, and even attempt takeoff, but not enough to provide full thrust. A mistake small enough to be missed, deadly enough to kill hundreds. Roland straightened slowly. If this had happened in the air, Avil didn't answer. He didn't need to. Airport investigators arrived soon after. They asked questions, took photos, downloaded data. Avil answered carefully, explaining what he had heard, what he had noticed. And when the fear had first entered his chest, one of the investigators looked at him in surprise. You're the youngest mechanic here? She asked. Avil nodded. And you noticed this before the instruments made it clear? Yes, Avil said. The sound was wrong. She studied him for a long moment, then wrote something in her notes. Nearby, the pilot stepped down from the cockpit. His face was tired, his uniform streaked with sweat. He walked directly toward Avil. You're the one who sensed it early, the pilot said. Avil froze. I didn't stop it. But you understood it, the pilot replied. And that matters. He held out his hand. Avil shook it, surprised by the firmness of the grip. I trusted my instruments, the pilot continued. Today, I learned to trust something else too. Asterisk as the sun climbed higher, the runway slowly returned to normal. The plane would not fly again for a long time. Reports would be written. Procedures would be reviewed. Mistakes would be traced back to their source. Asterisk, but for Avil Cistre, something deeper had changed. Asterisk, he realized that knowledge was not just what you learned from books or screens. It was what you carried inside you, the ability to notice, to question, to refuse silence when something felt wrong. Asterisk that day, Avil did not go home early. He stayed late, double-checking every system he touched. Not because anyone told him to, asterisk, but because he now understood the weight of his hands. Asterisk, and as evening fell over the airport, Avil Cistre accepted a truth he would carry for the rest of his life. Asterisk. Sometimes, survival depends on the courage to trust your instincts, especially when everyone else believes everything is fine. By the time evening arrived, the airport had changed. Asterisk, the runways were active again. Planes lifting into the darkening sky one by one, their engines roaring with full, healthy power. To most people, the day had returned to normal. To Avil Cistre, nothing felt the same. Asterisk, he sat alone in the maintenance hangar, the large doors open to the cooling night air. Tools lay neatly arranged beside him, untouched for several minutes now. His mind kept replaying the moment when the plane had almost lifted off, almost flown, almost killed everyone on board. The thought made his chest tighten. Footsteps echoed behind him. Avil looked up to see the chief engineer, Mr. Harlan, approaching. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes, known for speaking only when it mattered. Asterisk, long day, Harlan said. Asterisk, Avil nodded. Yes, sir. Asterisk, Harlan sat across from him, folding his hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was respectful. Asterisk. We've finished the initial investigation, Harlan finally said. The fuel control valve was left partially closed during overnight maintenance. Procedures weren't followed. Responsibility will be handled. Asterisk, Avil lowered his eyes. It could have been worse. Asterisk, it almost was, Harlan agreed. But it wasn't. And that's because someone noticed. Asterisk, Harlan looked directly at Avil now. You. Asterisk, Avil swallowed. I didn't stop the plane. Asterisk. No, Harlan said calmly. But you understood the danger before it became obvious. That's rare. And it's valuable. Asterisk, he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a formal report, Avil's name mentioned more than once. Not as blame, but as observation. Asterisk, from now on, Harlan continued, you'll be assisting with final pre-flight sound and systems checks. Officially, asterisk, Avil's eyes widened. Sir, I'm only 19. Asterisk, Harlan gave a small smile. Age doesn't listen, experience does. Asterisk, as Harlan stood to leave, he paused. This job isn't about machines, Avil. It's about people who trust machines. Never forget that. Asterisk, when the hangar emptied, Avil remained behind. He walked outside and stood near the runway fence. A plane lifted into the night sky, climbing steadily, safely. The sound was strong, confident, correct. Avil closed his eyes and listened. Asterisk, he thought about the passengers from Flight 217 people who would never know how close they came to disaster. Children who would grow up, parents who would return home. Futures that had quietly continued because of a sound that didn't feel right. He didn't need them to know his name. That night, Avil wrote in his small notebook, something he had started keeping when he first joined the airport. Asterisk, never ignore the quiet warnings. They speak first. Asterisk, days turned into weeks. Procedures changed. Double checks became standard. Avil trained with senior engineers, his confidence growing, his humility staying intact. Some still saw him as young, but no one ignored him anymore. One afternoon, a new mechanic asked Avil how he learned to hear problems so clearly. Avil thought for a moment before answering. "I listen like lives depend on it," he said, "because they do." Years later, Avil Cistre would look back on that day as the moment everything truly began. Not his career, but his responsibility. He understood that heroism was not loud or dramatic. It didn't always involve action at the last second. Sometimes it was standing alone, trusting your instincts, and refusing to stay silent. As another plane disappeared into the sky, Avil felt the weight of his role settle firmly on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a promise. A promise to listen, a promise to care, a promise to protect lives from the ground up. And at just 19 years old, Avil Cistre became something more than a mechanic. He became someone the sky itself could trust.